People are getting meaner online, right? There's a feeling among many that there's been an increase in the amount of toxicity they see online, often in comment sections. This is something I've observed myself. Even the most harmless posts will receive abuse, particularly on short form video like Reels and TikTok. It seems like people don't have the ability to keep scrolling, they have to comment and express their displeasure with the poster. And that's excluding politics, news, and controversial topics generally, where we've come to expect toxicity. Of course, it's possible that this is just nostalgia, that the internet has always been this toxic. The online disinhibition effect, as it's called, is certainly nothing new. The reduction or abandonment of social restrictions and inhibitions found in normal face-to-face communication when using remote electronic communications. Basically, the idea that the nice old lady next door or the quiet, polite kid is the same person spewing bile on the internet. And internet arguments have existed as long as the internet has. It wasn't all peace, harmony, and civil debate until recently. So why does it feel like things have become so much less civil recently? Let's get into it. To identify trends in toxicity, it's necessary to automate the analysis of what people write online, as it's obviously not viable to do this manually when looking at hundreds of millions or billions of comments. So this requires the use of APIs, application programming interfaces, basically an easy way of accessing additional functionality via code. Specifically, it's sentiment analysis APIs that are used, defined by AWS, Amazon Web Services, as the process of analyzing digital text to determine if the emotional tone of the message is positive, negative, or neutral. Many sentiment analysis APIs go beyond just good, bad, and neutral though, such as the Perspective API, a state-of-the-art classifier for the automatic detection of toxic speech. Made as part of a collaborative research effort by Jigsaw and Google's counter-abuse technology team. Perspective defines toxicity as a rude, disrespectful, or unreasonable comment likely to make someone leave a discussion, and the API has been used in several studies on internet toxicity. Persistent interaction patterns across social media platforms and over time is one such study and was published fairly recently on the 20th of March 2024. The study analysed 500 million comments from 8 platforms, including well-known ones such as Facebook, Reddit, Telegram, Twitter, and YouTube, but also Gab and Vote, social networks popular with the far right, and Usenet, one of the first internet discussion systems. The data used spans 34 years from 1989 to 2023 and is one of the largest studies of its kind. While the study does not measure if there was an overall increase in toxicity, no study seemed to do that, it did look for patterns in toxic behaviour. It found consistent conversation patterns in user behaviour, irrespective of the platform, topic, or time, and the persistence of these patterns across 3 decades. One of the key findings was that longer conversations were more likely to be toxic, which seems to conflict with Perspective API's own definition of toxicity, a rude, disrespectful, or unreasonable comment likely to make someone leave a discussion. While participation in conversations does decrease over time, this does not correlate with the toxicity of the comments. The study had a few explanations as to why longer conversations tend to be more toxic. First, controversial topics might lead to longer, more heated debates with increased toxicity. Second, the endorsement of toxic content by other users may act as an incentive to increase the discussion's toxicity. Third, engagement peaks, due to factors such as reduced discussion focus or the intervention of trolls, may bring a higher share of toxic exchanges. The study had some interesting findings, but more than anything it highlights the challenges of measuring toxicity. The concept of toxicity in online discourse varies widely in literature, reflecting its complexity as seen in various studies. The efficacy and constraints of current machine learning based automated toxicity detection systems have recently been debated, but it acknowledges that, despite these discussions, automated systems are still the most practical means for large-scale analyses. Basically, it's not perfect, but it's best we've got. The study also doesn't discount the idea that a higher percentage of comments are toxic than they have been in the past, only that the way toxicity arises in discussions has remained the same. Another limitation of the study was that it focused on controversial topics, normally political, such as vaccines, news, conspiracy, and climate change. However, historically at least, this is the kind of content that Facebook has pushed. This was highlighted in the 2020 paper Angry by Design, which explores the role that platform design plays in toxicity. The study points to Facebook's boosting of divisive content, a result of the engagement it drove, what Facebook used as a key determinant of what appears in users' feeds. The study even refers to Facebook's own research from 2018. An internal research team at Facebook reported precisely this finding. By design, it was feeding people more and more divisive content in an effort to gain user attention and increase time on the platform. However, Facebook management ignored these findings and shelved the research. In 2021, Meta published a blog post reducing political content in newsfeed, about a year after that journal article had been published. Meta introduced tests to reduce political content in users' feeds, apparently in response to feedback from users, such as by putting less weight on comments and shares when ranking political content. Research backs up this idea that news and politics uniquely attracts toxic conversations, such as the 2020 paper Topic-Driven Toxicity, which examined over 320,000 user comments and found that topics like racism, Palestine, and war and conflict have more toxicity in the comments between 0.423 and 0.484, and topics such as science and technology, environment and weather, and arts and culture have less, between 0.277 and 0.303. While Meta's changes to its feed represented an overall reduction in political content, there was some room for nuance, such as by putting more emphasis on news signals, such as how likely people are to provide us with negative feedback on posts about political topics and current events. Subsequent updates to the blog post indicate that the test was successful, but there's no publicly available data on this. It kind of seems like politics has just been replaced with AI slop. But if you ask many people, particularly those that are chronically online, this toxicity isn't just pervasive in political conversations. There's generally an acceptance that political conversations online are nearly always toxic. Even the most harmless content has toxic comments, which arguably makes these comments even worse, because they're unexpected. A video as simple as someone sharing their passion for coffee, maybe an elaborate, expensive setup to produce the perfect cup. Frivolous? Sure. Unnecessary on some level? Yes. But personally, I love hearing people share their passion, and I think most people do too. There's something heartwarming about the way someone's eyes light up, maybe talking faster as they gush about the topic. The Instagram Reels comment section, however, disagrees. In fact, Instagram Reels is the platform that comes to mind for many when the topic of online toxicity comes up. The care and attention that goes into the perfect cup is bad, and not just bad, but wasteful, stupid, pointless, bullshit, useless consumerism. Gay? Hunter Kaimi articulates this perfectly.
Have we forgotten that other people might have a different preference than you? Do we forget that other people have hobbies and they might just enjoy something because they enjoy it?
But coffee is just one example. It could be a silly skit about office life, you're just whining, being a baby, being lazy, don't know how good you have it, posting some fun graphic design you did, your job is stupid and you're overpaid. Everything and anything justifies, often self-righteous, hate. Creators have some means to bury this kind of comment, such as liking other ones to keep them at the top, but it doesn't take many scrolls to find the bitter ones, and it's often impractical to delete all toxic comments. Understanding this kind of toxicity is hard because it doesn't relate to controversial topics that more obviously stir people's emotions. As we saw in the Perspective API example, defining toxicity is difficult, and this is something defining and detecting toxicity touches on, suggesting that a prominent reason for limited success in detecting toxicity is the lack of understanding of the challenging nature of toxicity, which fundamentally requires context outside of the explicit content. When it comes to this wider context, this is something that all, if not most of us, can agree is turbulent, with political polarization being an issue for some time now. According to persistent pattern interactions, the polarization of user opinions intended as the degree of opposed partisanship of users in a conversation may have a more crucial role than toxicity in shaping the evolution of online discussions. It's difficult to measure political instability, but there is the Geopolitical Risk Index, created by Caldara, Dario, and Matteo Lacovello in measuring geopolitical risk, and it aims to measure adverse geopolitical events. Unsurprisingly, this increased significantly following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the October 7th attack, both conflicts that many countries have direct involvement with. This compounds existing economic stress, with much of the world going through a cost of living crisis, and the stress to provide for yourself and family is constant for many. There's also indications that we're becoming lonelier, such as the Survey Center for American Life study that we have much fewer close friends than 3 decades ago, and the WHO declaring loneliness a global public health concern. To complete the picture, Gallup has its annual Global Emotions Report, which uses positive and negative experience indexes to measure life's intangibles, feelings, and emotions. Negative emotions actually declined for the first time since 2014, but they were still substantially higher than the last time they declined. And people bring all this baggage from the real world online. But what if there's inherent problems with comment design that makes this all much worse? This is worse when it comes to short form video, and TikTok is a prime example of this, even if it doesn't deprioritize politics as Meta does, or at least they haven't shared that information publicly. If you're a regular user, you probably know what I'm talking about. The biggest problem is that comments aren't chronological, instead ordered by popularity, meaning you'll see replies to comments before the original. They're not nested either, which makes it difficult to follow conversations. And this is made even more difficult by the fact that users' display names are shown instead of their actual username. Display names can effectively be customized to anything, and are often short and/or symbols only. Comments are normally limited to 150 characters, limiting people's ability to get their point across, potentially to encourage them to make videos instead. Users can't share links either, which means that sources can't easily be cited, and that conversations are often a series of unsubstantiated claims and mudslinging. There's a good chance TikTok's commenting system is designed to deter lengthy, in-depth conversations. From TikTok's perspective, this would make sense, as longer conversations do tend to be more toxic, as we discussed earlier. The natural response to this is that people shouldn't have in-depth conversations in the comment sections of short-form video platforms. On some level, this is true. Forums, for example, are more suitable for these types of discussions. They're not perfect, it can still be difficult to follow conversations when multiple people are taking part in the same thread, but they do have features that make it easier to follow along, such as quoting the reply to post in the reply. Replies can also use links, formatting, etc. to help communicate their point more clearly, and the more visual elements make it easier to remember users. Forums also have moderators, which short-form video generally doesn't, only the original creator, who can do little more than remove replies and block users. Reddit is far from perfect, but the ability to nest and unnest comments makes it easier to navigate, even if this can be awkward on mobile. At a point though, conversations are limited by the inherent limitations of text, even if this is still well beyond short-form video comments. It's difficult to convey tone and avoid misunderstanding without writing long comments that often aren't read by the people being replied to. This is where voice-based live streams come in, which, in theory, resolve many of the issues of text conversations. It's easier to convey tone, and, more than anything, it's a reminder that the person you're talking to is human. Of course, discourse also happens on full live streams where all participants are on camera, but optional video lowers the bar for entry. There are numerous debate live streams on TikTok, which appear in the main For You page alongside short-form video, encouraging random users to drop in. Sometimes there'll be upwards of 1,000 people in these, but most of the time there's much less, normally in the tens. These debates focus on hot-button issues and will have deliberately inflammatory captions to attract participants. There's obvious topics like the US presidential race, but broader ones too, such as race and gender. These are designed to provoke passionate engagement, and conversations do often devolve into anger and talking over each other, despite rules and requests for respectful engagement. Moderator functionality does help a bit though, and the tone is generally a bit more respectful than the arguments seen in comment sections. The key problem with these debates though is much the same as in comments, a lack of sourcing. Discussion of weighty topics requires sourcing, whether that be peer-reviewed research or even just reliable news sources. Often claims are thrown around without anything to back them up, due in part to the fact that links can't be shared in the chat. The person making the claim has to tell others what to Google and make sure they're looking at the same result. It can take time to work out if the source is reliable, and really, the other person has to read the full article to catch any nuances. And that's difficult to do quickly for news articles, let alone peer-reviewed research, which is the ideal source of big claims about the ills of society that are discussed in these debates. This kind of article takes a while to read, and many, if not most people, haven't read one. All this is incompatible with the fast-paced nature of these online debates, where there's a need to make your point in a quick, compelling way. There's a pressure to convince others watching, and the format, taking place in the context of people with notoriously short attention spans, incentivizes bold, impactful claims. And despite the ability to use tone in this kind of context, there's still a lack of body language that forms a crucial part of real-world discussions. This is something that Persistent Interaction Patterns points out when it says, the lack of non-verbal cues and the physical presence on the web can contribute to increased incivility in online discussions compared with face-to-face interactions. These debates sometimes focus on a recent news story, and the Southport stabbing was a prime example of this. If you are unfamiliar, there was an attack on children in the town of Southport, near Liverpool in the UK's north. It was committed during a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga workshop, ultimately claiming the lives of 3 and leaving 10 injured. Immediately after, discussions on TikTok Live began popping up, speculating and sharing misinformation, such as that the attacker's name was Ali Al-Shakati, not true, and that the attacker was an immigrant, also not true. One stream had the fake name photoshopped into a Guardian headline, and these lies would ultimately be attributed to a disinformation outlet on Twitter. At the time of making this video, Axel Rudakabana, a 17-year-old British citizen born in Cardiff to parents from Rwanda, has been charged but not yet sent to trial. Misinformation was able to thrive due to an absence of official information being released, but this was due in large part to the fact that the suspect was 17, and the official release of information without certainty can risk a trial collapsing. I watched in real time as misinformation spread on these live streams, with far-right nationalist accounts using photoshopped headlines to give their lies legitimacy, and participants whipped themselves up into an anti-immigrant and anti-refugee frenzy. This rage soon spilled out from TikTok and other platforms like Telegram and Twitter onto the streets of the UK as rioters threw bricks at the police and even each other. This culminated in break-ins of temporary accommodation for asylum seekers and yes, even attempts to burn the residents alive. To be clear, misinformation shared online wasn't the sole cause of the riots. Anti-immigrant sentiment had been brewing in the UK for years, as the previous government deflected blame for its own failings onto the most vulnerable. and many of the newspapers that condemned the riots were the same ones that have been stoking the hatred that caused them, a necessary maneuver to maintain their appearance of respectability. But TikTok completely failed to moderate the misinformation on its platform, despite very clear and consistent patterns in the accounts that were sharing it. Even when the misinformation was confirmed as untrue by authorities, instead letting hate and anger thrive under the guise of patriotism. Even when I flagged them for verifiably false information, they weren't taken down, and I'm not convinced they would have done much anyway, as they all have endless identical backups. I won't pretend that toxicity is an easy problem for platforms to fix, especially at the scale at which the biggest platforms operate, and that's if toxicity is even a problem that can be fixed. Factors like sarcasm and context make moderation difficult, and automated moderation systems are still flawed, due at least in part to challenges defining toxicity, as the Perspective API example illustrated. Facebook's approach has been to reduce politics in users' feeds, and while they consider this to be a success, toxicity remains a problem, even in the most innocuous content. Whereas TikTok's approach seems to be to design a comment section that discourages users from having lengthy conversations altogether. While this is the logical approach to toxicity as something that increases with longer conversations, as research backs up, this seems to just be another way of avoiding the problem. In spite of this, TikTok Lives is a blind spot when it comes to toxicity, probably because it's even harder to automate moderation than in text comments. And this toxicity is often mixed in with misinformation, which is problematic at the best of times and dangerous at the worst, something we're now seeing play out in the streets. There seems to be a perception among social media platforms that the problem of toxicity that they deal with is a result of the context in which they operate. And while this is true to an extent, the integral role of social media in our society means that they are very much influencing this context, instead of just being a passive participant. The toxicity we see on social media, often in unexpected places, didn't happen overnight. It's a culmination of years of negligence from social media platforms and the governments we rely on to keep them in check. But what are your thoughts? Have you seen an increase in toxic comments on social media? Or are things pretty much the same as they've always been? Let me know in the comments and hit those like and subscribe buttons. I release a new video every couple of weeks. Thanks for watching, see you next time.